Murder attempt survivors, what happened?
My heart dropped when I saw this question. I was 15 and my dad plotted to murder me. My dad had only been back around for a few months after being homeless for a while due to his 20-plus year meth addiction. He had never been violent towards me before, but I later found out he had tried to kill my mother just months prior and she brushed it off as him having a PTSD episode. I came home from school, he surprise attacked me by suffocating me with a pillow, strangling and attempted to sexually assault me. I had just gotten a boyfriend and wasn't around as often, and by the language he used when trying to assault me, it was clear this was the source of his anger. He had the TV turned up to an extreme volume so no one could hear me scream. I ended up being able to get up and run to the bathroom, the only room in our house with a lock. He grabbed the door but I found a sharp object in the bathroom and told him to back up or I'd kill him. I somehow was able to shove the door shut and lock it. He tried to get in the bathroom but couldn't. He actually said, "I'm leaving," and closed the front door to try and lure me out. It was quiet for a while but then I heard him breathing outside the door. He eventually left after a few hours, taking my money I had hidden in my bedroom, and called a relative telling them I'd been in a terrible accident and he needed a ride to the hospital. He ended up running when dropped off and was missing for a year. Most terrifying year of my life. His body was found by a fisherman at his favorite lake growing up. They found high levels of meth in his system and it appeared to be a suicide. Later, when investigating the home I was attacked in, they found hammers, duct tape, knives under my mum's mattress and looked like he very much so intended to kill me.
At the beginning of October, my husband was trying to buy a PS5 on Let Go. He wanted to make sure it actually worked, so he gave the guy our address. I told him a dozen times that he was going to get robbed. He still had the kid come over. As soon as he got there, he pulled a gun, grabbed the cash and shot twice. One hit my husband in the abdomen. The second went through the stairs behind him and traveled 30 to 40 feet to the kitchen. I heard the commotion and ran downstairs and chased him away from the house. We got to the front gate and he pulled his gun again and shot at me. He missed my head by less than 2 inches. He was caught and is being charged as an adult, 16, for 2 counts of attempted murder and a variety of other charges.
I was at a party and was talking to a guy. My ex-boyfriend saw this, was crying, and lured me into a room where he locked the door, proceeded to beat me and then attempted to strangle me. I was screaming for my life, but no one could hear me over the music at the party. Meanwhile, another friend was searching for his coat that had his cigarettes in it. It happened to be in the room we were in. He realized the door was locked and asked the homeowner to get the key to the room. When they got the door unlocked, they found me being strangled by my ex, but they were able to get him off me in time. I always thank my lucky stars that friend needed a cigarette when he did, probably saved my life.
And that's why you should smoke. On a serious note though, that was really fortunate.
Not me but my dad. When he was in his early 20s, he was in a band staying in a hotel with his then GF. When he woke up in the middle of the night to someone trying to RP her, he pushed him off and they started to fight. He tells the story comically about they fought through the hotel out onto the street. Long story short, the guy ends up stabbing my dad 11 times and leaving him to die on the sidewalk. A stranger was walking his dog at 5 a.m., calls an ambulance and keeps on his way. They come, save my old man, reinflate his lung and he survives. Attacker gets caught and thrown in jail, find out he had gotten out of jail 2 days prior to the attack for stabbing another person to death. Fast forward a couple years again and my dad's playing in a band in a bar owned by his buddy, spots the guy who stabbed him. Tells his friend who owns the bar that guy's gotta go, that's he guy who nearly killed me. Stabber gets kicked out and was found hanging the next day in his hotel room. But wait, there's more. 35 years later, my aunt moves to the city we live in and hits up some dating app or some poo and meets the officer who responded to my dad's attack when he was a rookie, so a lifetime later my dad gets to shake the hand of the cop who helped save his life nearly 4 decades earlier. Poo's crazy.
Wow, that is crazy. Your dad telling it comically, he sounds like quite the guy. I'm picturing Peter vs. the giant chicken from Family Guy. I don't personally remember this, and only found out the story after I told my mum I have fear of looking out windows at night. Apparently when I was 3 or 4 I was in the kitchen with my mum one night, when a man came through the kitchen window and tried to stab her. My father ran in with a gun and shot at the man. He climbed back out the window, and the police never found him. Another time when I was 13, we lived in an apartment complex my father owned. At night the laundry room needed to be locked up and the change emptied. The change was close to around $100 a night. I would normally lock up the laundry building around 10 p.m. It was a really rough neighborhood, so my father had a large dog, Rottweiler, Malamute mix, and he was trained to walk with me everywhere. I was a very small girl and I'm sure that dog was a big deterrent for a lot of people. Anyway, one night I go out to close down the laundry building, and my dog won't come inside with me. He is barking up at the sky, and won't follow any command I give. I cleaned up the building and gathered the coins, and the whole time my dog is standing by the door looking up at the sky. I lock up the door and turn to leave, and a man jumps down off the roof. He has a huge knife in his hand. He yelled something, over my dog losing his mind barking and growing. He had a crazy poo-eating grin on his face. He then tried to run at me, and my dog jumped up on him. I ran back to our apartment, and my dog stayed back to fight him. I told my dad what happened and we ran back to get my dog, and find the man. My dog was stabbed 3 times, and needed to be hospitalized for days at the vet. He pulled through and lived many more years. They never found the guy.
Good dog.
He pointed the gun at my face, pulled the trigger and it didn't fire. I could have beaten Usain Bolt in the next 10 seconds.
Glad you're still around to tell the tale. I have a good friend with a similar story. He thinks the gun jammed or the safety was still on or something. He likes to say, "You've never seen a fat boy move so fast after that."
It was Christmas Eve 1991, had a 3-year-old and 6-month-old at home. How very different their lives would have been.
My twin sister and grandpa were killed during a home invasion. I should have been there, but I left to go give a drinking friend a ride home. When I came back there were police and tape and ambulances. Home invasion gone wrong, they were both killed execution style. She was 30. Love you GPA Felix, and the other half of my soul is already in the after with Amelia.
I'm so sorry for your losses.
Growing up, one of my older cousins was a legit sociopath. He was on meds for oppositional defiant disorder. Some of the pettier things he did included blowing up caterpillars and frogs with firecrackers, keeping a stockpile of knives under his bed, stealing bikes, things of that nature. FR even stole my Egyptian Mew card. One day, when I was around 9 to 10 and he was 12 to 13, we were playing in his backyard with several other kids. For some reason he took an axe and threw it at me as hard as he could. It went right past my head and lodged in the tree behind me. No doubt in my mind he was aiming for my head and missed. To this day I still don't know why he did it. I've kept my distance from him ever since. He wasn't mad at me or anything, we were just playing. Lately I haven't heard much about him besides that a mutual friend stopped talking to him because he got them addicted to coke, and he posts a lot of homophobic poo on social media.
Oppositional defiant disorder is no joke. I know that firsthand because of a cousin who has it. I'm convinced he's going to prison eventually. He hasn't done anything big now, but I believe it's a matter of when, not if. On top of that, his mum spoils him and treats her other 2 kids like garbage. On top of that, he even threw a hardcover textbook straight at my mum's face one time. Whole situation makes me depressed.
Not me, but a girl I went to school with. Her deranged uncle broke into her house dressed as a FedEx driver while her parents were running errands. Mom and dad came home, tried to wrestle the gun from him before she and the husband were shot and killed. He then made all 5 kids lay on the floor as he shot them one by one. The bullet intended for my friend grazed her hand and head and she played dead. She was the only survivor. She came back to school the next year, but people were horrible. There were nasty rumors about how she made it up, faked it, how it was her fault, etc. She's now engaged and in college. One of the strongest people I know, and such a sweetheart. People are horrible.
How the hell could people insinuate it was her fault? OMG.
Because people are pooty, and they have to make every situation about themselves somehow. Some people said she was in on it and that's why she was the lone survivor. The case was pretty popular, you can look it up, uncle killed girl's entire family, and it'll pop up. It happened in Texas.
I wasn't the intended target, but I could have died. I worked at small family-owned bicycle shop. My boss, the father of the family, was a pretty nice guy, as far as I knew him, anyway. One day, I was rearranging displays and my boss's wife and kids were there. A pretty normal day until somebody slammed the shop door open and emptied a full pistol clip into the shop, specifically at my boss. I got on my stomach as soon as I knew what was happening and waited until I heard the guy running away. My boss was shot a couple times in the head and chest and was obviously dead on the spot. His daughter got hit in the upper arm and the wife broke her arm diving to the floor. Edit. I tried to find any news article about this but couldn't. It happened in Iloilo City, Philippines around December 2015. Apparently, it was about my boss not paying money he owed to the guy that murdered him. Don't know if they ever caught him.
Not my story, but my cousin's. She was married to this crazy man. I won't go into detail about the ways he was awful, but he was insane. Also, before he married my cousin, he had another family who all died in a house fire. All 4 of his children and his previous wife. We all felt bad for him for suffering such a tragic loss, because we didn't know what he was like behind the scenes at home. We never suspected anything off about that, just thought it was a tragedy. Well, finally my cousin decided to leave him. She took her 2 kids and moved away. She had to leave abruptly, so she was missing a lot of important things. Social security cards, birth certificates. Stuff like that. One day, after things cooled down some between her and her ex, she arranged for her to go over to their old house and gather the rest of their things. He asked that she bring the kids, because he missed them. Luckily, she decided to let them stay at their friend's house instead. She went over to the house, and he was absolutely enraged that she didn't bring the kids. He shot my cousin 4 times and then shot himself in the head. He was planning to do a murder-suicide with the whole family, that's why he wanted the kids there. My cousin was shot twice in the neck, in the face, and in the arm. Somehow, none of the bullets struck any major arteries or anything. She was able to make it next door to her neighbor's house and get help. She survived a murder-suicide attempt, and her ex didn't. That whole thing really makes me look at that house fire tragedy in a different light.
Never go back for anything. Documents can be replaced. Toys, furniture, clothes can be replaced. The most dangerous time in an abusive relationship is planning to leave and leaving. Don't give the abuser a chance to have access to you again. I've played muscle for people needing to go back to their ex's house for their things. All in all, is just prefer people stop taking that risk. I left an abusive relationship with nothing except a backpack full of clothes and my son. You can rebuild. It sucks and it's hard, but it's better than giving them a chance to kill you. Strangulation by a step-parent. When my strength and eyesight faded and I felt about to lose consciousness for the last time, they let up just a hair. Next thing I knew, I was in another room with a locked door between us. Was primal poo. No idea how escaped. We'll never know if they experienced a brief moment of clarity that they could actually go to jail, lose their cash cow in the form of my bio-parent, or if they thought the deed was done. They tried to break the door down and I considered jumping out the window, but I knew they would catch me before I reached the neighbor's house and they wouldn't fail a second time. Might even add the neighbors. And if I left, it'd be my bio-parent for sure. The perfect bruises of their hands on my neck lasted weeks. Wore a scarf. They're still together.
I've got no specific advice. But from your story alone, it sounds like this hasn't finished playing out, and your bio-parent, yourself or a stranger, might end up dead if nothing changes.
When I was living overseas, a man broke into my apartment. He came in through the window of my studio apartment at about 5 to 5:30 in the morning. Thankfully, I was awake. He started to go attack me and tried to strangle me. I was able to fight him off by getting my feet up onto his chest and pushing with all my strength. This happened a few times. The only thing he would say was, "You die, you die." He was slender and I don't think he was very prepared, and I don't think he expected me to fight back. Partway through this, when I realized that he wasn't giving up, is when I really started to get scared and think to myself that I needed a plan and to get out of there. My friend lived next door, so I decided I was going to make a run for it. Once I stood up, he ran back out the window. I grabbed my glasses and my phone and ran to my friend's apartment. Thankfully, she was awake. I told her what happened and she was like, "You have to call the police." By this time, shock was starting to set in, and for some reason, my brain was telling me, I am okay, so nothing happened. She kept reiterating that I needed to call the police. I decided to call one of my coworkers who spoke English really well and ask her. This coworker was horrified at what happened and immediately said that she was going to call the police for me and call me back. Once the police arrived, she acted as the translator to tell them what happened.
I was attacked in a friend's house by an ex-husband. He slit her throat and slashed my face with a box cutter before hitting me over the head with a plate, knocking me out temporarily. He then lit the place on fire with us in it. I managed to wake up and drag her outside, and a neighbor called the police ambulance. They caught him 2 days later trying to commit suicide in a Ramada inn. We both lived through it, and now he is serving a life sentence.
Greater than we both lived through it, and now he is serving a life sentence. I'm happy to hear this. Much love for you, stay safe.
Last year my neighbor plotted to kidnap and murder my wife and I. I was working from home one morning and heard a knock at the door at 8 a.m. I ignored it at first, hoping whoever it was would go away. After a minute of knocking I opened the door. It was my neighbor who I had spoken with a few times. My wife was at work and I could tell he was surprised when I opened the door and not my wife. He was expecting her to be home and not me. He noticed that I recently purchased a new car and asked if I could show it to him. He tried to walk inside, but I asked him to walk around to the garage because of COVID-19. I showed him the car and he was acting strange. Always kept one hand in his pocket. My garage is very small, so we were in close proximity to each other. He kept inching closer to me, which made me uncomfortable. He brought an open Coke bottle, filled with a tan liquid, and said, "I brought you a Coke." I declined the offer. After a few minutes he asked if he could see my gauge cluster. We walked around to the driver's side and I sat in the driver's seat to turn on the car and show him the gauge cluster. With door open, there was very little room besides the side of the car and the garage wall. After turning on the car he pulled a large hunting knife to my neck. I immediately grabbed his wrist and slammed him back into the wall. At this point we are wrestling between the car and wall as I try to get the knife away from him. During this 30-second period, it seems like an absolute miracle that I was not stabbed. The blade grazed past my stomach multiple times. I was eventually able to grab the knife and force him out into the driveway. Immediately after grabbing the knife he started saying, "What are you doing?" "I was just trying to show you my knife," and acting like I had just assaulted him. I was in such a state of shock that I actually started to believe him and wondered if I had overreacted. I know this seems ridiculous, but I was completely delusional at the time and did not know what his intentions were. I stood in the driveway, hands shaking, with 911 dialed on my phone but did not make the call. He acted like nothing just happened and started asking my questions. Really suspicious questions. "Do you have a security system?" I lied and said yes. I asked him to go home multiple times and eventually went back inside the house but did not shut the main garage door. At this point I needed to drive into work and started getting ready. Showering, getting dressed, etc. I assumed he had just walked back home. After getting ready I went outside and walked around the house to the garage with a can of bear mace. I searched around the garage and was worried he was still there. As I started to get into my car and leave, I saw my neighbor laying down behind some boxes in the garage, staring at me. I yelled and ran as fast I could back to the front door and called the cops. Cops arrived quickly and my neighbor had disappeared. They searched around his house and mine but could not find him. They said they would stay in the area but were going to leave for now. My house is surrounded by woods and I have a large back porch. Frightened, I stood in the middle of the porch while holding bear mace. I looked around and noticed my neighbor hiding in the woods staring at me. I ran back inside and called the cops. Cops arrived quickly and pulled guns on my neighbor and arrested him. He later said, "I was just trying to scare him." They found the knife, zip ties, vodka, and a note on him that read, "Turn around and put your hands behind your back." It was later discovered that the Coke bottle he wanted me to drink contained pesticides. He was there to murder me or my wife. He was charged with 3 felony counts and is currently awaiting trial.
Okay, he thought I wasn't home and expected my wife to answer, is the most horrific part. His original plan didn't involve you, but he was willing to go through you to get to her.
My father tried to choke me to death. I fought him off and beat the poo out of him. It was the last time he put hands on me. But the other abuse kept going. He died 12 years ago from cancer. I struggled with PTSD and alcoholism until he died. I got sober and haven't had a drink since he died. I see a therapist and take medication. I go to AA and now work with addicts and abused people. I have also chosen not to have children. I have no desire to ruin a human and am too afraid I would if I had a kid. My mother, who was also an abuser, died 3 years ago from a heat attack. What did I do? I survived them. I never gave in. I grew and healed and now I help other survivors. Thank you for letting me share my experience. If you were abused or have survived attempted murder, it doesn't have to rule your life. You are not alone. You can heal too.
When I, was 7 years old, I made friends with a neighbor girl and we would frequently have play dates. She had an older brother, around 12 to 13, that would babysit us during these hangouts. One day my parents let me go over to their place on my own, as their house was in spitting distance of ours, but the brother was the only one home. He assured me that his sister would be home soon, so he lured me out to the backyard. For background, the house was completely fenced in and the backyard had a tree line surrounding it. He told me to wait by the swings, which I did, and all of a sudden he charged at me with a sledgehammer. I fell on my back in fear and his swing landed between my legs into the ground. I ran as fast as I could back to my house. My parents, to this day, say it was just horseplay, but I will never forget the look in his eyes after he missed his swing.
Even if it was just horseplay, what the F kind of horseplay is that? There's nothing that would make that okay, even if this kid was just fooling around, and it doesn't seem like he was. I'm so sorry this happened to you.
My older sister was incredibly abusive towards my family, but especially me. I'm away now, so no worries. When I was 14, our dad and her were having a super petty argument that just exploded into her trying to kill him while he tried to defend himself without hurting her. She tried to stab him 3 times over but thankfully failed as my dad disarmed her. I could only watch this whole thing happen, completely frozen. She then turned to me and let out a horrible scream that I will always remember. She grabbed a knife off the floor and lunged at me, knocking me to the ground. She swung the knife towards my eye while screaming something along the lines of, "I'm taking your eye." She kept pushing the knife towards it, but I managed to put my hands over hers and pull it off. My dad also tried to pull her off, but when she got like this, she had this insane primal strength and could barely be moved. The knife then cut underneath my eye, nearly hitting the eyeball. As usual with these events, nothing came of this, and my mum and sister still gaslight me and say that I had some glandular issue and that's how I got a scar. Edit. Wow, I had no idea this would get as popular as it has. Thanks to those who are offering their support and sharing their experiences. It's a very difficult thing to do. A lot of questions and statements on here, some are ones I've heard all my life, others not so much. All of them are hard to answer. Question: what's the deal with your mum? I love both of my parents very much and we still have a good relationship. However, the way they dealt with and still deal with my sister was at best awful. When I say that I was abused by my sister my whole life, I'm talking as far back as when we were babies. We're only 2 years apart. Whenever my sister would get violent or aggressive, sometimes my mum would step in and defend me. She knows my sister's behavior isn't normal, but she's terrified of her and what she might do. My mum's behavior can be a little weird around it, but as I've gotten older, I've come to understand why she acts this way. At times, my mum will downplay stuff and will mention how her older brother did similar stuff to her growing up. To her, this is normal. However, sometimes when I get flashes from my PTSD, she comforts me and confirms that what I went through was hellish, even going as far as saying she's a terrible mother for not stepping in when she needed to. Also, my mum wasn't present during the actual stabbing, she was only there for the aftermath, and my sister fed her a bunch of lies. For example, I once caught my sister punching herself in the legs so she would bruise up and make it look like my dad had hit her, when he didn't. Question: what about your dad? I love my dad, but he's a deeply flawed man. He grew up very poor without education and has a very old-fashioned way of looking at work and masculinity. My whole life he would joke around and say things along the lines of he didn't think I was a real man because I was less manly than other guys. A few comments state that my mum and sister are similar, however, this is the opposite. In fact, my dad and sister are incredibly similar. My dad has never been physically abusive like my sister, but his behavior is often erratic and overly explosive. My dad has had a long line of mental illness run in his family, a fact I only found out a year ago, so it's incredibly likely my sister has inherited it from him. She either used to bully me or bully my dad, because she has a control complex and wanted everyone to let her do whatever she wants. Question: where were the police? This is a question I get asked so much. As to why my parents never contacted the police, I have no idea. I think there's a selfishness from my parents, for sure, and I think they're aware of this. Nobody wants their kid to be the crazy one who got arrested. It seems like a stupid thing to state, but presumably once you're a parent, your attitude changes. It even took some convincing for my mum to let me go to therapy because she was sure I didn't need it. Also, the police aren't equipped to deal with domestic disputes like this. They just don't give a poo. At best, nothing will be done, and my sister would have had even more reasons to be angry. Nearly every authority figure I tried to tell through my life has teased me about it. Once when I was 11, I tried to tell a school counselor about the abuse while crying my eyes out. He told me that I was lying, that I was a good actor, and that the fact I'm getting bullied by a girl shows how much growing up I have to do and that I should just punch her. Awful guy. Just after the stabbing, my mum came home and called my sister and said that if she didn't come home, she had ran off, she would call the police. She promptly came home. Question: Why didn't you just fight back? This abuse was going on my whole life. It took 4 years of therapy and a therapist telling me at 20 years old, "You were abused," to make me realize what a cruel joke my life was. Fighting back only made it worse. You raise your voice a little? Get smacked. You tell her to stop? That's another smack. You get aggressive? All your stuff gets broken, and a smack. There have been few times where I've had to physically fight back because if I didn't, I would have been killed by her. If I ever beat her in a fight, nothing would happen. Just the same poo the next day. Abuse was my life. It still is. If nobody is hurting me, then I have to hurt myself. It's the way my brain will work for the rest of my life. I'm actively trying to get better, and I am healing, although very slowly. Question: Why didn't you get the hell out? Where was I going? I had nowhere to go. I was a child, teen. I left the city for another when I was 21 to pursue university. That's when I knew I could feasibly get out and never talk to her again. I blocked her number the moment I moved in. I still haven't spoken to her since June of 2019. She talks about me to my parents every time she sees them, faking sadness and saying how much she wants to see me. My parents refused to tell her where I lived, and I currently live with my partner, where I'm much happier. She also knows of my abuse and supports me. However, I soon have to go back to see my grandma. I have been making an active effort not to run into my sister, but it's inevitable. I'll try and work it out.
Yo, what the F is wrong with your mom? If one of my kids tried to kill the father or my children and one of my children, I'd send them to a facility for help. Jesus.
It happened during my first year in uni. I lived with 3 roommates at my dorm. A few months into the first semester, one of my roommates had a mental breakdown and attempted to strangle me while I was asleep. I woke up to his hands around my throat, his knee on my chest and a deranged look on his face. I tried pushing him off me, clawed at his face etc., but to no avail. My eyes started to dim, my hands felt leaden, I was sure I was going to die. Fortunately my other roommate wasn't asleep, he was laying under the covers browsing on his phone. The sounds from our struggle caught his attention, and after seeing what was happening, he pushed the attacker off me and knocked him to the ground. He then woke the other roommate and together they restrained the attacker on his bed and called the university police. The police arrived around 15 minutes later, and after we told them what happened, they called the actual cops. My roommate was arrested and taken to the police station. There he had another breakdown and bit one of the cops. He was transferred to a psychiatric facility after that. He was also expelled from the university.
Something similar happened to one of my old uni roommates. She got moved to our room after her suitemate had a breakdown and attacked her with a hot pan. She luckily grabbed a knife and backed into her own bedroom before locking the door and calling campus police. It was an insane story, but heard it both from her and our RA before she moved in.
My drunk ex-husband came home in the middle of the night while I was sleeping. He was pissed off at me for some unknown reason and got on top of me in bed and strangled me to the point where he thought he had killed me. When I came to, he was sitting on the side of the bed crying. He had choked me so badly that I had broken blood vessels in my eyes. I never spent another night under the same roof as him, and we divorced soon after.
I'm glad you made it out of there.
When I was a kid, my father got into a relationship with a rather strange, but still kind woman. She had a son, who was only a couple years older than me. At the time I didn't think anything of their relationship, but looking back at it, it was very abusive. They got into fights often, most of them turning physical, even when both me and my father were present. The kid would always try to push me over and hit me, but I would never say anything to my father because I didn't want to ruin his relationship. Now here's where my memory gets hazy, so take the details with a grain of salt. My father and his then girlfriend were having a conversation, while I and her son were a few meters away from them. He once again tried to hit me, at which I sat on top of him to prevent that. I was a really fat kid and he was very skinny, so despite the age difference this somehow worked. I told him I would get up if he left me alone, and since he promised to do so, I just sat beside him. He proceeded to get on top of me and strangle me. I remember trying to cry out "Fought, help" and reaching out to my father, but not being able to make a single sound and feeling like I was being pulled away from him. I'm pretty sure I passed out after that, or was at least very close, because after that I only remember that my father's girlfriend and her son were now gone. I never saw them again, though the last I heard of them was years later, after my dad received an anti-wedding invitation from her. From what my dad told me, she was angry at her son, but was even more pissed at my dad for ending the relationship. I'm pretty sure he didn't really intend to actually murder me, but then again, what is the intention of trying to strangle a 7 to 8-year-old kid? All in all, this was surprisingly less traumatizing than you think it would be. TLDR. Father's ex-girlfriend's son tried to strangle me.
While transferring work locations, I was staying with a cousin of mine at the new location. Her psychotic, alcoholic, de-addled, vicious ex-boyfriend, whom she had just kicked out of her house, was stalking her. He saw me move in, assumed I was the new boyfriend, and lay in wait for me outside her house one night, where he jumped me from behind and slit my throat. Despite losing massive amounts of blood, I didn't die. I didn't even feel that bad, so while he was trying to break into her house, presumably to kill her too, I grabbed a baseball bat from the trunk of my car and beat him until I passed out. When I woke up I wasn't thinking all that clearly, so I went inside, cleaned myself up and drove to the hospital. My cousin wasn't even home at the time, she had gone into the city with her mother for the weekend to see a show and go shopping. My attacker and I ended up in the same ICU. I had rendered him a quadriplegic. There was a great deal of civil and criminal legal bullpoo to deal with, but in the end I was cleared of any wrongdoing, and he was put on probation for 10 years. As he was no longer able to so much as brush his own teeth, his lawyer, provided by his wealthy family, convinced the judge, DA, that he was no longer a threat to anyone and the state would be spared the burden of providing him the round-the-clock care he needed if he wasn't sent to prison. I was left in massive debt which took me many years to pay off. I did sue him for the injuries I sustained, but despite being a trust fund baby from a wealthy family, he himself was indigent. He'd blown his trust fund on DG, booze and gambling, and had nothing. His family provided him with everything, including his lawyer. He died about the same time his probation ended.
Man really said, call an ambulance, but not for me. Also sorry this ever happened and props for beating the living poo out of him.
I honestly should have just called an ambulance, but I really wasn't thinking clearly at the time. I mean, there was a landline in the house, this was 1988, so cell phones weren't really a thing, and it wouldn't have been any problem. All I could think of was, I have to get to the hospital. Problem was, I was new to the area and didn't know where the hospital was. No problem, I think to myself, I'll just stop at a gas station or 7-Eleven and ask directions. Except that I was covered from head to toe in blood. So I went inside, changed my clothes and got cleaned up. Now, I can go ask directions. But no, so fast, I had a gaping 7-inch long gaping wound in my neck, it looked like a toothless, bloody clown smile, the muscle on the side of my neck had been partially severed, so it hung down a lot. So, what else could I do but put on a turtleneck *, then * go ask directions to the hospital. Which is what I did. And it may not have been the best plan, but here I am, so it worked out okay.
A while back I was at my friend's house when a guy came in through balcony glass door. He had climbed up to 2-story balcony, and proceeded to start yelling at her things like, "Who is the mother f*** *CKER now bitch," and I stood up to protect her. It was dark and I couldn't see the knife in his hands which he then stabbed me in the face with. Never met the guy or even knew his name. After I got out of hospital and started to try and figure out what was that all about, our mutual friend told me that he had asked the perp the same question and his answer was, I was going to murder her but didn't know Sebla it was there also. I'm 23 and that was my second time getting stabbed, and altogether I have 5 stabbing scars. WTF equals welcome to Finland.
I didn't know Finland was so stabby.
Not me but my sister. She was working in retail sales at a large popular mall in a large city a few years ago. One day as she arrived at the mall for work, she stopped to use the restroom. The ones general mall goers would use. After using the restroom, she went to wash her hands when she noticed in the mirror that a man was standing behind her. She made eye contact with him and apparently gave him a nod of acknowledgement. The man was apparently holding a garbage bag he had gotten out of the roost room trash can and had fashioned it like a rope. He proceeded to approach my sister and wrap it around her neck, choking her and then slamming her on the ground. She doesn't remember much, but the security camera showed the man literally choke her unconscious and then jumped, stomped on her head repeatedly. The man fled and she was found by another mall goer. She was covered in blood and her face badly disfigured. She broke her jaw and lost several teeth. Long-term brain damage is still not known. He tried to kill her. He was a complete stranger but the police think it was a gang initiation type of thing. The guy is now in jail for a very long time, and my sister has very severe PTSD from it. Edit, for everyone asking about the cameras in the bathroom. I didn't see the footage myself, my mum and dad saw and relayed what they saw to me. The cameras were only on the hand wash area and entryway obviously.
Not sure if this counts, but had this neighbor kid I used to play with, a complete psycho. I was 4/5, he was a year or two older than me. One day he convinced me to walk well beyond the distance that my parents allowed me without an adult, wanted to show me something, he said. We arrived at a small lake. He pointed at the water and said, "Look, there's tadpoles in there. Let's catch some. We don't have a net, you'll have to jump in and catch them with your hands." I told him I couldn't swim, he insisted. He told me he'd pull me up if I was drowning. I refused. He kept trying to convince me but eventually gave up, said I was a coward. A friend of my mom saw us on our way back, and my mom wasn't very happy about the situation when she found out. 11 years later, I transferred schools and ended up in the same class as him. I figured my childhood memory of him was exaggerated. We talked about childhood memories. He told me how one of our neighbors, who was a cop, had screamed at him for no reason because he was playing with a cat. Remember this? I told him it was nice to see him have so many friends. He responded, "Friends? They're not my friends, effing kids. I only let them think I'm their friend." Smiling the whole time, figured he was joking. I later told my mom about having met him. She went quiet. I told her that he seemed to have turned out all right, nothing more said. Couple of weeks later, I brought it up again. She said, "As a mother, I'll never be able to trust that boy, and you shouldn't either." She went on to tell me how I was unable to sleep and cried a lot at night when I was a young kid. Reason being that he had told me he was planning to burn down our house and murder me and my family in our sleep. And about our neighbor screaming at him, turns out he was actually caught torturing the poor cat. After that I avoided him. Thinking back, his behavior was off even as a young adult. He was clearly manipulative and lacked empathy. Final thoughts. Pretty sure he wanted to drown me that day and wanted it to seem like an accident.
This gave me goosebumps. Holy buckets. Glad you're alive to tell the tale.
Me too. Just glad I had enough sense in me to not listen to him at the lake. Could have ended badly, for sure.
Oh boy, I just woke up, but this is finally a Reddit question I have an answer to. I was waiting at the bus stop. It was only me and an older woman waiting there. I had received a phone call from my partner a few moments earlier about how there had been a stabbing and that I should stay safe. A few minutes after that call, a man crossed the road, walked up to me and hit me over the head with a wooden fence post. I blacked out. Not sure how long it was for, but I came to, on the floor with blood spilling out from my head. It's foggy. I don't remember his face, but I know I looked up, said, "What the F," over and over. I somehow managed to stand up and run. I don't think he expected me to get up and was put off guard. I know now that around 30 minutes before hitting me, this man had stabbed and killed a 24-year-old man. I often think about how if I hadn't woken up in that moment, I most likely would have been killed. This guy had done it before. He had the capacity to. I ran across the road, almost getting hit by a car, and made it to a pharmacy where amazing staff took care of me while we waited for an ambulance. I apologized many times for getting so much blood on their floor. I remember finding my wallet and phone in my pockets. Realizing that this guy did what he did solely to hurt me made me break into tears. I made it to hospital, gave a 12-page statement to the police. They took my clothes as evidence, my favorite Balor Club shirt which was covered in my blood. I'm still mad I wore it that day. I got 7 stitches in my head. I passed out when getting them. My family smuggled in some McDonald's and I requested some earphones because I knew I wouldn't sleep that night. I think I listened to like 5 Giant Bomb podcasts that night. Sorry this is disjointed, these are just the things I remember. It was a long recovery, lots of hard moments. It really shakes your trust in strangers when one tries to kill you unprovoked. 2 years after, there was a trial where they sent him to a mental prison. It was a long week. While there I met the mother of the man he had killed. She cried throughout every day. When I met her I completely froze. I couldn't say anything. It's the hardest thing I've ever done, even though I did nothing. Edit. Thank you all for your wonderful words and kindness. It's really made my day, and hello to all my fellow Irish folk. It means a lot and truly amazes me that you remember this. I've had a few people offer to buy me the shirt I mentioned. That's unbelievably kind. I'm not too sure how that would work, but feel free to DM me.
What happened to the old woman at the bus stop?
She got away, but I was told by the guards that she was awfully disturbed by it. The man was arrested soon after he attacked me, so luckily no one else was hurt.
I was kidnapped after being RPD a few days prior. I'd threatened that I was going to the police and he flipped, abducting me and threatening murder-suicide. He drove more and more remote and I was tied up and helpless. He couldn't decide which way to kill me and I manipulated the F out of his uncertainty. He had his whole hand around my throat at one point and I threw all pride and shame to the wind by telling him how much I loved him. He eventually let me go after I brought him to the hospital and promised to help him. Really felt like a coward after that. All I could think of was my kids and how I didn't want us to leave each other, but the fact I lied and told someone I loved them to get out of being murdered really effing comes between me and my sleep at times. Edit. Thank you for all your lovely comments. I sleep mostly fine but my brain goes back to that night times. I went to the police and made a full statement just waiting to see if he will actually be prosecuted. I also had some therapy sessions which were very helpful, but as a few of you pointed out, there is a possibility it's PTSD. For the most part I'm generally okay day to day and I feel incredibly grateful to be around my kids and raise them. Your comments and thoughts were so kind, thank you all so much.
Doing whatever you need to escape, is the right thing. Good job. I'm sorry you had to suffer through something so awful.
It was a few years ago now. The reasonable part of me knows pride comes a sad second to being alive, but the reasonable part isn't always the most vocal part of my brain.
There was a girl in the village of my parents' vacation home who was known to have mental health issues. My family never judged her for it. Both my parents are teachers and used to deal with slow students that say some wicked things every now and then. When I was 2, my parents went on vacation and so did that girl's family. That girl was 12. Both families were having lunch together and my parents left the girl to play with me. When my sister, 9 at the time, went to look for me, I was being drowned in a water tank by said girl, who was just looking at my sister smiling and saying some weird things. My sister screamed and my parents and the girl's family went to the rescue in time to save me. I have no memory of this, so all I know is the story my family told me a few times. I haven't actually met this girl yet, neither have I ever talked to her family. Both families still go on vacation to the same village at the same time, but my parents cut ties with them.
I feel like I'm going to watch how my children play with others more closely moving forward. They are little dudes, and so vulnerable. I'm almost sure she'd have played it off as an accident if she wasn't interrupted. And I'm so effing glad you have an older sister.
It wasn't me, but my sister, and I caught it happening. One night when I was about 15, I fell asleep on the couch. I woke up to strange sounds coming from the vent which fed to my sister's room in the basement. The sounds were like her muffled voice with quick bursts of her entire voice, but not using words. But then I heard, "No," and I just immediately knew it was distress and very, very bad. She had a live-in boyfriend. I ran to my mum's room and said, "Something is wrong with sister's name, run." My mum hauls ass down those stairs and breaks through the door, still can't believe the strength and speed she had doing so, and I heard, "Get off of her. What are you doing?" And a ton of commotion. Turns out the boyfriend was strangling her, had taped her mouth shut, and had a knife by his side. My sister was blue by that point. Long story short, his mum was friends with the town judge and he got let go, no jail time. He went on to kill another woman, who was a young mother. He had a history of weird abuse which is typical of evolving psychopaths. He's now in prison. Edit 1, he not only killed the next woman, but RP'd her dead body before stuffing her in a toolbox and throwing her in a canal. Edit 2, tried to find out what happened to the judge in the meantime. They tried to remove him from office for being an overall scumbag link. Another user found the Forensic Files episode on this link.
Let go, WTF.
My stepfather decided he'd had enough one night and tried to murder my family. My brother and I survived. My mother did not. Edited. Wow, I didn't expect all the upvotes. Thank you. So to fill in some blanks, I don't think there was any warning about what was going to happen. The night it happened he shot my mother, came upstairs, shot me, shot at my brother and then shot himself. He survived until he reached the hospital, but he didn't make it despite their attempts. So no, he wasn't punished or locked up. I guess I'm glad, or I might have always been looking over my shoulder in case he got released. Yes, it was on the news. Which was horrible because everyone at my school knew all about it. When I was just trying to live with some kind of normalcy, it was out there for all to know. I just wanted to be treated the same so I could pretend like things were the same. I found out a few details years later, and just when I thought I had kind of accepted it all, it turns out my mum was getting ready to leave him. Not only might she have been spared what happened to her, but she wanted to get back together with my dad. So that's pretty much the story. Hope I satisfied your curiosity. And thanks for all the thoughts and hugs. X.
I have so many questions. I'll just say I'm very sorry for your loss.
It was a long time ago now, so it doesn't hurt as much, but I still miss her all the time.
Was in the military. As officers in training living on base, we had individual rooms that shared common areas. There were 16 of us to a floor spread over 2 towers. 2 corridors on each floor of a tower with 4 per side. I was asleep in my room one Friday night. Everyone else was out drinking. I stayed back as the officer in charge, so essentially had duty. Guy in my corridor with a suspected drinking problem came back totally plastered and smashed down my door. Pulled me out of bed and held me at rifle point for what seemed like half an hour. Other neighbor came back and managed to talk him down. I was talked me out of filing an official report by my chain of command, as the guy had just broken up with his on-base girlfriend. Was forced into mediation with him instead with the on-base chaplain as a personality difference. I medically discharged with PTSD shortly afterwards.
Not me, but my mom. A man entered her house just before lunchtime and stabbed her and her maid multiple times. He also kept punching both of them while stabbing them. Eventually he got tired and left. My mom played dead. Then when she was sure that they were alone, she checked on the maid to see if she was still alive. Both of them survived the attack, but the police never found the guy. The thing is, my mom knows the guy. See, she owns a flower shop, and had 2 people working for her. One of them is this nice gay guy, and that guy had a boyfriend. It was the boyfriend who attacked my mom, and my mom told me that he was high and was looking for money. It seemed like his boyfriend didn't want to give him money that day, so he decided to attack his BF's employer instead. Since then, my vibrant, outgoing mom became reclusive and she developed various health conditions. She's also always in a state of pain, which led her to become dependent on pain meds. The meds ruined her kidneys and liver, and now she's undergoing dialysis for it.
I am so sorry, sad face.
Thank you. It really saddens me that my mom isn't quite the same after what happened to her, but she's quite tough. She has her good days and bad days, but she tries to get through them.
I have a schizophrenic brother who started an argument when late teens over my dad giving me his old iPhone. He decided a rationale tactic was to chase me with a chainsaw, then try to chainsaw my car. Police came, but not before he broke my mother's ribs. I've had an intervention order against him since and don't consider him family.
Jesus Christ, you sure it was just schizophrenia?
He has a range of mental health issues, however behind all of this he is just an asshole. This was repeat violent outbursts over several years, however this incident was the one that really shook my mother, and I was finally old enough and had enough courage to get police involved myself.
Well, years and years ago when I was in elementary school, a new student came, and I was essentially designated his friend. Fast forward a few months and I'm having the sole play date I ever had with him, during which he attempted to throw darts, the kind that pierce the wall, at my head, and a few minutes later chases me around screaming at me holding a surprisingly large branch. His mother did not care, although she did, disturbingly calmly, call my mom when I asked to leave. Fast forward a few days, and he's being ushered out of the classroom and is no longer permitted near me because the teacher caught him writing a letter detailing all of the ways he planned to torture and eventually execute me. When the school tried to have him tested, his mom pulled him out and sent him to a private school. Oh, he also threatened to tie me up in the woods, a few trees next to a parking lot, near the school, and come back at night with a knife. Sort of more a constant threat of murder situation than actual concerted murder attempt, besides the playdate thing. Somehow I wasn't especially affected by that whole fiasco. Honestly, I was kind of somewhere in the realm of bemused. Although when I was reminded of him a couple of years later, I'll admit I had a few sleepless nights, possibly one hallucinatory vision of him crawling around on a ceiling. I got over it pretty soon after though. Welp, that's that I guess.
Do you know what happened to him?
Nope. I had one friend who transferred to the same school as him, which is how I was reminded of him, but that was pretty much the last time I spoke to her. I do hope his mom let him get help eventually. Early when he wasn't in a rage he was pretty nice, and had an odd fondness for hamsters.
Happened to a friend of mine. Not super dramatic, but I see it as a murder attempt. I had a friend I met at university, Harry. Nice guy and we hit it off. We even start playing social sports that went on well after we graduated university. One day he introduces us to a guy called Zane, a 6'4" ex-military guy who works in security. I immediately don't like him because his personality is the worst, hyper-masculine douchebag, one-ups everyone, drinks too much and is just all-round unpleasant. I stopped playing social sports because I couldn't stand Zane, so I stopped seeing that group for a while. I catch up with a friend who is still good friends with Harry, and she tells me that one night during a gathering Zane just snapped and essentially tried to kill Harry by beating the poo out of him. Harry is 5'4", so it was not an even fight at all. Everyone at the party freaked out and it took 3 or 4 people to pull Zane off. It was so bad that Harry ended up in hospital in pretty bad shape. Everyone is speculating that it's PTSD from his military service fueled by alcohol. I went to a party with Zane once and the guy drinks a pulload. Harry has been experiencing residual effects, going to therapy, and he's also on antidepressants. He's also considering taking legal action, but there's a whole lot of baggage to sort out there before he does. Harry refuses to go to any events that he suspects Zane will be at. I also hear that Zane still taunts him about this incident. This guy is a total psycho.
For me, a kid probably 5/6 of a year older and double my size tried to drown me. Thank God he was a weak, lanky teen.
Damn, same experience. I was panicking as it was happening, and with a pool full of people no one tried to help me. Not sure if attempted murder. But I took pictures of some guy's house for my job, and he shot at my car. The story: I was a foreclosure inspector. I showed up to his house as a representative of his bank, and he didn't answer his front door. So I went to take a picture of his electric meter to prove someone lives there. He comes out, yelling at me. Normal response, always happened. He said he could kill me for trespassing on his lawn. I didn't argue because he had a gun in his pants. I put details of the interaction with the man in my inspection notes, including the threats and gun part. They quit sending me it there for 6 months. Finally they sent me out there again. Foreclosure can be a slow process. I forgot the house and the interaction that happened there. He came out with a gun before I could even get out of the car. He started shooting as I drive off. Of course I called the cops. Bank played no hand in this at all. They acted like they didn't even order the inspection. I screenshot it though because I knew they would do this. Even if I wanted to drop the charges, some crimes you just can't. I had to give a statement and all that on what happened. Not the only time someone pointed a gun at me on that job. But it was the only time they shot at me.
Solo hiking, ran into 2 men who acted nice at first, then started following me on my trail. Things escalated. They beat me up pretty bad while trying to RP me. I fought like fury. I'm fit and used to do combat sports, so I was able to do quite a bit of damage right back. I think when they realized they themselves were taking too many hits, they cut their losses and fled. I have no doubt they would have killed me as well as RPD me if I hadn't made it such an unholy battle for them to get me down. I was a mess, and still needed to hike back to civilization after that. I could write a effing book about that return hike. Eventually I made it out. I don't talk about it, like ever. I guess Reddit is as good a spot as any to put it down. ETA. Thanks for the awards and awesome comments, guys. Like I said, I never talk about this, and maybe I should. I was diagnosed with PTSD after, and in some ways, the battle still rages. But sharing it here has actually made me feel so much better, in ways I never would have expected. Much love to you all, and whatever you do, be safe doing it. And girls especially, take a self-defense course. You never know what might happen.
I fought like fury, F yeah. I'm very very sorry this happened to you. This quote is inspirational AF. I have a daughter I'm gradually teaching self-defense to as she gets older. I'm going to borrow this line and tell her this story. I'm glad you made those bastards suffer.
Dude, thank you. This is the comment that finally makes me cry. Please do that. Teach her how to fight. Get her to get her friends to learn how to fight. Thank you for being a good parent, and valuing this as a life skill, because it is. May you raise a brilliant little badass who never has to feel like prey.
My ex was insanely abusive. Left me for dead once, and I overheard him on the phone talking to someone about what to do with the body. He had put my head through the car window and dragged me inside and threw me onto the bathroom floor. I woke up because I started drowning in my blood, face down. I managed to escape and call my mom. She got me a taxi to a hotel out of his area until I could get home the next day. She actually drove there to pick me up from another state because I had too many injuries to fly. Police didn't do much because I crossed state lines. This happened on the West Coast where he lived. I was originally from the South. Cops were very uncooperative. Kept saying they'd get back to me. Checked out his place. Found some blood, chalked it up to a domestic dispute. I got exhausted from the whole thing. A year later, he dated another girl. Cut her head off and dismembered her. He's serving like 25 to life, I think. Edit. I changed some details about location because this was getting kinda big. Maybe too little too late, but oh well.
Fuick, glad you survived. That girl's death is on those cops as much as him. Take care.
Thank you. It sure was. She had a name similar to mine and looked like me too. Another eerie layer.
Firstly, throwaway account. For reasons that will become obvious quickly. Secondly, names have been changed. My family has a stalker. I like to call that person the family stalker. For purposes of this post I'm going to refer to the stalker as Tiana. This all started when I was 10 years old, and for context, I'm in my early 30s now. My mother is a clever businesswoman and has been exceptionally successful in her career and businesses. She primarily works in Germany and has made a significant amount of money. When I was roughly 10, she decided to expand her business and open a new location. She partnered up with an old acquaintance of hers and they invested $1.5 million each into the new location. Unfortunately, the new location wasn't nearly as successful as the first one and ultimately, it failed. She lost $1.5 million, as did Tiana. Apparently Tiana couldn't stomach the loss and ended up suing my mum over it. Mum settled for $1 million. She got really sick of the lawsuit, and if she fought it she risked losing more dollar in lawyer fees, etc. Even though Tiana got most of her investment back, she was still bitter about it, and I guess she felt cheated. Tiana was so bitter and delusional, she got herself arrested on a small, petty charge. She did this so that she could find someone in the county jail who could murder my immediate family. Tiana's cellmate at county was there on a gang-related charge, and the cellmate snitched on Tiana because Tiana was actually scaring the cellmate and whatnot. The cellmate was also able to cut a plea deal for herself by snitching on Tiana. The cellmate worked with investigators to put Tiana in contact with a hitman that was really an undercover cop. And that's when all hell broke loose. Tiana started meeting with the cop weekly, plotting to kill my family. One day, I was in the hospital for a chronic condition and Tiana found out. Tiana started making plans with the undercover to go to the hospital and inject something in my IV to kill me. The hospital had to put me under an alias and moved my room. Poo like that would happen regularly. We'd get these reports from detectives detailing sick and twisted fantasies of the best way to torture and kill us. Tiana wanted pure revenge. As a family we implemented a lot of security measures. To this day, I'm very hard to locate. Finally, Tiana made that payment to the undercover officer and was quickly arrested. In court she pleaded out and was sent to prison for 5 years. I felt very cheated. 5 years of prison time for what was about 20 years of living in fear for our lives hardly seemed adequate enough. Fast forward 6 years, Tiana is released on parole and decides to try to expunge her record. Not only did she not get her record expunged, she got sent back to prison because it came to the court's attention that she was incorrectly sentenced, so they sent her back to prison for an additional 5 years. Today, Tiana is out and on parole again. So far, to my knowledge, she has laid off the whole killing train. However, so long as she's alive, she poses a real threat to my family and I.
So I was in the Navy at a party in a park with some other Navy people, got drunk, went off to pass out in the field. Meanwhile, rich Navy kid decides he wants to bring his CDs to the party, and instead of walking them back from his car, he decides to drive across 200 yards of grass instead. I was somewhere in the middle there, and the next thing I know there's a car driving over me and my head is bleeding and I'm going into shock. It's not clear whether he saw me before running me over, but one of the people in the car with him at the time told me that he had clearly said, "Hey look, it's my name," before accelerating and that after the bump, he just laughed and couldn't seem to figure out why everyone in the car looked so horrified. Anyway, the first thing everyone did was get their story straight, and said I had jumped in front of the car, and the kid's dad was so rich that I got in trouble, got sent to rehab, and then later drummed out of the Navy. I was also told that if I ever received a civil settlement from the kid, then I would have to pay the government back for all my medical care after the accident. Nothing is fair and F the military.
Neighbors heard me and my live-in perpetrator arguing, struggling, while I was being pinned against a wall and strangled. My neighbors called the cops came, but my perp suite talked him into thinking it was a misunderstanding and that it was over. They left, but one cop had a bad feeling. Bless his heart, he told me afterwards. He waited outside. My perp came at me, dragging a knife along the wall which made a creepy horror movie metallic sound, and I screamed. The cop broke the door down, saved me, and arrested my perp. Perp spent 3 months in a psych facility because they admitted to wanting to hurt me some more. To clarify, I'm saying perp because they don't deserve to be acknowledged by name, gender, or relationship to me.
I respect that cop a lot and I'm glad he waited. But it's scary that it can be talked out of so fast.
Okay, this will read as if I am super confident and handled a situation exceptionally well, but in reality I handled it incredibly poorly, and the way it panned out is pure luck. I was in a club with a girl who I think was called Caroline, and, since I am not sure and it was 28 years ago, I will refer to as Caroline. It was going well, except that I was very drunk, and when we went outside to spend some time together I sat in a bench and puked. She sat with me a while and wanted to walk me home, but I do not handle vomiting well, and it was her night, with lots of her friends in the club, so I insisted she go back in and I went off home alone. As we separated, a man came from the shadows with a knife. The sort of knife that has no real use apart from stabbing people with. It turns out that the club Browns had a gay night on a Thursday and he was out to murder a homosexual. It was the very early 90s and queer bashing was sadly a thing still. Anyway, he was very clear in outlining his plan and explained to me why he was going to do it, and, in my drunken state, I tried to argue that the club was not a gay club, I was not gay, and, anyway, look, I had been there with Caroline. He was having none of it. He has worked himself up to this and was visibly shaking with anxious excitement. He was going to knife me in the faces because I was giving money to a club that supported homosexuality. Also, I was English, which to his nationalist Scottish mind was absolute proof that I was a homosexual. I argued that I was leaving the awful place, walking away, so I was the good guy and not my finest hour. Why not worry about Caroline instead, since she was going back to going then more cash? I was very, very drunk, and, whilst I fully recognized what was going on, I truly did not associate it with any actual fear of the outcome. It was a little like watching a scene in a video game. Anyway, this chap asked me which one was Caroline, and I said, "Here, give me the knife, I will do it." And he did. And I threw it on a roof and walked home. In the morning I remembered it, but was not even sure it had really happened, but that night I met up with everyone and I was some sort of hero, although I really was not, I was an idiot. The highlight in the storytelling was that I had thrown the knife right up into a gutter. It was a pitched roof. Lobbing a knife onto it was not a reliably effective method of disposing of it. It should, by right, have just come back, and then I walked very calmly away. In reality, I turned the way I had thrown the knife, felt a bit sick, and forgot all about the chap who was going to stab me with it. His decision, upon losing the knife, to wander quietly away, saved me, much more than any of my own actions, some of which appear incredibly cowardly in the light of day.
Drunk neighbor held me hostage in his house for hours when I was 13. Tried to stab me in the neck. Somehow I grabbed the knife and wouldn't let go as he continued to stab at the back of my neck. He'd pushed my head down into his lap. He was about to RP me in the shower and forgot to take off his work boots before he took off his pants and got tangled up in his clothes. I made an excuse to go in the living room and ran home. He stalked us. My mum didn't take it seriously. I went to stay with someone else. A few months later my mum told me he stabbed another girl. She ran through the window to get away from him. Her lungs were collapsed. I think she may have died. He went to jail. I don't know what happened to him other than that. I don't know how he was charged or if he's still in jail. Did something happen to you? If you're fishing for scary Reddit stories for YouTube, please don't use this. If you're researching true crime and have more questions, PM me.
I was shot in 2012 while delivering pizza. I was in air traffic controller school at the time. I ended up mostly okay, but disqualified from my career because I had trauma-induced seizures as a result. Of the 3 attackers, 1 died in a motorcycle crash before trial and the other 2 were out of prison by 2016. Edit, lots of comments trees below. Sorry I am not responding to everyone. I ended up changing careers and I work as a software dev at one of those tech giants. They can pin everything on their dead buddy, planning, acquisition of the gun. He is a convenient excuse. Their defense is that they did not know he was planning to hurt anyone and he acted alone. It's not a crime to be friends with a criminal, so one would have to prove that they had some foreknowledge of what was going to occur, and were not just nearby when their friend did something stupid. While I think everyone knows that's far-fetched, it's difficult to prove and there's no strong evidence to prove otherwise, and we cannot prove they ever handled the gun either. When people take plea deals, the likelihood of conviction comes into play. Because they might have been acquitted in a trial for attempted murder, they were offered a plea down to second-degree assault with a weapon which they accepted. The prosecutor did have a conversation with me before she offered the plea, but made it clear that the state does the prosecution, not the victim. When statues of George Floyd went up, I could not stop imagining how livid I would be had statues been erected to one of my assailants. Of course, Mr. Floyd was murdered and I am glad Chauvin was convicted. But if people started putting statues and murals of the scumbag up and pretending he accomplished something with his life, I think I would explode. Floyd was convicted of armed robbery in 2007. I don't think I would have thought like this before. These are the sort of things that change about you when you become a victim.
Very sorry to hear that.
Thank you for watching. We upload new videos every day, so be sure to come back for more fun. Please consider liking and subscribing if you enjoyed the video.